So, today I'm going to be reading a book to you called The Mountains of California. It's by John Muir. This is a beautiful book. I found it at the Anarchist bookstore in San Francisco on Haight and Ashbury. I'm just going to read a little selection for you today from chapter 7. Okay, the name of chapter 7 is the Glacier Meadows. So, write as I may, I cannot give anything like an adequate idea of the exquisite beauty of these mountain carpets, as they lie smoothly outspread in the savage wilderness. What words are fine enough to picture them? To what shall we liken them? The flowery levels of the prairies of the Old West, the luxuriant savannas of the South, and the finest of cultivated meadows are coarse in comparison. One may at first sight compare them with the carefully tended lawns of pleasure grounds, for they are as free from weeds as they, and as smooth. But here the likeness ends, for these wild lawns, with all their exquisite fineness, have no trace of that painful, licked, snipped, repressed appearance that pleasure-ground lawns are apt to have, even when viewed from a distance. And, not to mention the flowers with which they are brightened, their grasses are very much finer both in color and texture, and instead of lying flat and motionless, matted together like a dead green cloth, they respond to the touches of every breeze, rejoicing in pure wildness, blooming and fruiting in the vital light. Glacier meadows abound throughout all the alpine and subalpine regions of the Sierra in still greater numbers than the lakes. Probably from 2,500 to 3,000 exist between latitude 36 degrees 30 and 39 degrees, distributed, of course, like the lakes, in concordance with all the other glacial features of the landscape. On the headwaters of the rivers there are what are called big meadows, usually about from 5 to 10 miles long. These occupy the basins of the ancient ice seas, where many tributary glaciers came together to form the grand trunks. Most, however, are quite small, averaging perhaps but little more than 3/4 of a mile in length. One of the very finest of the thousands I have enjoyed lies hidden in an extensive forest of the two-leaved pine, on the edge of the basin of the ancient Tuolumne Mer de Glace, about 8 miles to the west of Mount Dana, or Dana, I don't know. Imagine yourself at the Tuolumne Soda Springs, on the bank of a river, a day's journey above Yosemite Valley. You set off northward through a forest that stretches away indefinitely before you, seemingly unbroken by openings of any kind. As soon as you are fairly into the woods, the gray mountain peaks with their snowy gorges and hollows are lost to view. The ground is littered with fallen trunks that lie crossed and recrossed like storm-lodged wheat, and besides this close forest of pines, the rich moraine soil supports a luxuriant growth of ribbon-leaved grasses, bromus, trichitum, calamagrostis, agrostis, etc., which rear their handsome spikes and panicles above your waist. Making your way through the fertile wilderness, finding lively bits of interest now and then in the squirrels and Clark crows, and perchance in a deer or bear. After the lapse of an hour or two, vertical bars of sunshine are seen ahead, between the brown shafts of the pines, showing that you are approaching an open space, and then you suddenly emerge from the forest shadows upon a delightful purple lawn, lying smooth and free in the light like a lake. This is a glacier meadow. It is about 1.5 miles long by 1/4 mile wide. The trees come pressing forward all around in close, serried ranks, planting their feet exactly on its margin, and holding themselves erect, strict and orderly like soldiers on parade, thus bounding the meadow with exquisite precision, yet with free curving lines such as nature alone can draw. With inexpressible delight, you wade out into the grassy sun lake, feeling yourself contained in one of nature's most sacred chambers, withdrawn from the sterner influences of the mountains, secure from all intrusion, secure from yourself, free in the universal beauty. And notwithstanding the scene is so impressively spiritual, you seem dissolved in it, yet everything about you is beating with warm, terrestrial, human love and life, delightfully substantial and familiar. The resiny pines are types of health and steadfastness. The robins feeding on the sod belong to the same species you have known since childhood. And surely these daisies, larkspurs, and goldenrods are the very friend flowers of the old home garden. Bees hum as in a harvest noon, butterflies waver above the flowers, and like them, you lave in the vital sunshine, too richly and homogeneously joy-filled to be capable of partial thought. You are all eye, sifted through and through with light and beauty. Sauntering along the brook that meanders silently through the meadow from the east, special flowers call you back to discriminating consciousness. The sod comes curving down to the water's edge, forming bossy, outswelling banks, and in some places overlapping countersunk boulders and forming bridges. Here you find mats of the curious dwarf willow, scarce an inch high, yet sending up a multitude of grey silky catkins, illumined here and there with the purple cups and bells of bryanthus and vaccinium. Go where you may, you everywhere find the lawn divinely beautiful, as if nature had fingered and adjusted every plant this very day. The floating grass panicles are scarcely felt in brushing through their midst, so fine are they, and none of the flowers have tall or rigid stalks. In the brightest places you find 3 species of gentians, with different shades of blue, daisies pure as the sky, silky-leaved ivesias with warm yellow flowers, several species of orthocarpus with blunt, bossy spikes, red and purple and yellow, the alpine goldenrod, penstemon, and clover, fragrant and honeyful, with their colors massed and blended. Parting the grasses and looking more closely, you may trace the branching of their shining stems, and notice the marvelous beauty of their mist of flowers, the glooms and pales exquisitely penciled, the yellow dangling stamens and feathery pistils. Beneath the lowest leaves you discover a fairy realm of mosses, hypnum, dicranum, polytrichum, and many others, their precious spore cups poised daintily on polished shafts, curiously hooded, or open, showing the richly ornate peristomas worn like royal crowns. Creeping liverworts are here also in abundance, and several rare species of fungi, exceedingly small and frail and delicate, as if made only for beauty. Caterpillars, black beetles, and ants roam the wilds of this lower world, making their way through miniature groves and thickets like bears in a thick wood. And how rich, too, is the life of the sunny air. Every leaf and flower seems to have its winged representative overhead. Dragonflies shoot in vigorous zigzags through the dancing swarms, and a rich profusion of butterflies, the leguminosae of insects, make a fine addition to the general show. Many of these last are comparatively small at this elevation, and as yet almost unknown to science, but every now and then a familiar Vanessa or Papilio comes sailing past. Hummingbirds, too, are quite common here, and the robin is always found along the margin of the stream, or out in the shallowest portions of the sod, and sometimes the grouse and mountain quail with their broods of precious fluffy chickens. Swallows skim the grassy lake from end to end. Flycatchers come and go in fitful flights from the tops of dead spars, while woodpeckers swing across from side to side in graceful festoon curves. Birds, insects, and flowers all in their own way telling a deep summer joy. The influences of pure nature seem to be so little known as yet, that it is generally supposed that complete pleasure of this kind, permeating one's very flesh and bones, unfits the student for scientific pursuits, in which cool judgment and observation are required. But the effect is just the opposite. Instead of producing a dissipated condition, the mind is fertilized and stimulated and developed like sun-fed plants. All that we have seen here enables us to see with surer vision the fountains among the summit peaks, to the east whence flowed the glaciers that ground soil for the surrounding forest, and down at the foot of the meadow the moraine which formed the dam which gave rise to the lake that occupied this basin before the meadow was made, and around the margin the stones that were shoved back and piled up into a rude wall by the expansion of the lake ice during long bygone winters, and along the sides of the streams the slight hollows of the meadow which mark those portions of the old lake that were the last to vanish. I would fain ask my readers to linger a while in this fertile wilderness, to trace its history from its earliest glacial beginnings, and learn what we may of its wild inhabitants and visitors. How happy the birds are all summer, and some of them all winter. How the pouched marmots drive tunnels under the snow, and how fine and brave a life the slandered coyote lives here, and the deer and the bears. But knowing well the difference between reading and seeing, I will only ask attention to some brief sketches of its varying aspects as they are presented throughout the more marked seasons of the year. The Mountains of California.